Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel where we learn to be a better programmer. And in this video, I'm going to discuss how to get your pull requests shipped a lot faster. I'm going to give you 3 things that each pull request needs to have in order to pass code review without too much of a headache. Before we get started, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on future videos. So what is a pull request, right? So in our local side project development, we have a Git repo on our machine, and then we may have a GitHub repo that they're connected to, right? So what we do is we make a change and we push directly to master with no sort of code review or pull request sort of required, right? That's not how it happens in like the real world or at a company. Typically what happens is you are asked to implement a feature, you implement that feature, you submit it for code review, it goes through code review from some developers on your team or external to your team, and if they deem it's okay, then it gets pushed into master. Okay, so the point of having a code review or a pull request is to make sure that you don't introduce unnecessary code into master or introduce bugs into production and stuff like that. Okay, so what inevitably tends to happen is that the code reviewer has no idea what your code is supposed to do or why it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, so what ends up happening is you push your code for review, the reviewer looks at it, he's like, I have no idea, I have no context, I can't just ship this, so let me go back and add some comments that may be nit comments about like the syntax of your code or like the way you're implementing something, and not really have any comments that are substantial, right? So they're more just like surface level, superficial comments, okay? So that goes back to you, you address the comments, and then your senior developer or whoever's reviewing your code looks at it and is like, okay, that's fine, and then it gets shipped, okay? But this can happen, this iterative process can happen over and over, and it can stretch your code review potentially that for a relatively small change for weeks at a time, right? So you can basically be working on the same code review for like a couple of weeks, and then it finally gets shipped. So what I'm going to talk about is how to structure your code reviews in such a way that it decreases that time, or the intent is to decrease that time by providing additional context. Okay? So every pull request that I submit or code review that I submit, I tend to have these 3 things inside of it. So I tend to discuss the problem, I identify the solution and how it was implemented, and I talk about a result, okay? And then there's another step where if you have some sort of continuous integration pipeline or something like that, and how it was tested. So you might not necessarily need to have how it was tested because that might be implied in your system, but the main 3 things are problem, solution, and result, okay? So the problem is how we define what our code is supposed to be fixing or doing. Like, what's the point of our code, right? So there might be a bug, or there might be a more important feature that you want to implement. So the problem statement needs to basically say, there's a bug or there's a new feature that we're trying to implement in X, and that is what the point of this code review is, okay? Then the next step is called the solution. So the solution is how you went about solving that problem or implementing that feature, okay? So at a high level, you really want to dig into like if you added new classes, if you added new functionality, go into like, I added this function that does this, and I added this class that does this, and so on and so on. So when they look at your code, they link back to the solution statement, and they basically say, okay, this class is supposed to do X, Y, Z. Does it do that? Sure. Now, are they doing it the right way? Okay, so then your code reviews, when your code reviewer has more context, they're able to understand what your intent is, and then give you better comments. So they're not just like superficial comments about syntax or best practices or anything like that. They might have those additionally, but they might actually go deeper into saying, oh, why don't you use this higher level library instead of using lower level file IO, for example. So that's something that is really important, is like you want to ship your code, but you want to ship quality code. And I think the way you do that is providing additional context to your code reviewers and not just looking for superficial, like a quick ship it and then it goes into production, okay? Because your code reviews or your pull requests are linked back to you in terms of, you know, Gerard implemented this feature, and then later on, if there's a bug because of that, and there's no context provided and you just got to ship it, then it's like, why did this happen, right? Who allowed this to happen, right? So adding that extra context is another way of providing you with security in the future if that code ends up causing some sort of problem. Okay, so the people who investigate that problem look at your code review or your pull request, and they're like, okay, it's very clear that the thought process was there. It was very thorough and very thought out, but there just ended up being some sort of edge case that was missed in a test, and people are more likely to forgive that rather than just like getting code shipped straight through and not having the due diligence done on it properly. Okay, so then the last thing you need to have is the result. Okay, so the result of your code. So this can go in a lot of ways. So if it's a bug, for example, you say the result is very simple. It fixes this bug that's linked to maybe a Jira ticket or something like that. The result could also be adding a new feature. So we changed the button color on our iOS app or something. So what that looks like is you might even provide a screenshot of the before and the after. So this also gives additional context of here's what happens, here's what the previous behavior was, and here's what the future behavior will be. Okay, so remember, your code reviews are supposed to craft a story that other people will be able to follow for years to come, potentially when they look back at the Git history of a particular file. Okay, so now another thing is how did you test your code, right? So if you didn't test your code, and it gets shipped into master, there's no real way to understand if it's going to cause a bug or do something like that, right? So adding your test plan and how it was tested is another piece of armor that you have to protect you from future things that may happen, right? So if you have a code review or a piece of code that you shipped to production and you didn't test it and it introduced this major bug and your company lost a whole ton of money, and then they come back to the code review and they ask you, did you test your code? How did you test it? So if that history is ingrained in the pull request, then you have another piece of armor to protect you, right? First of all, we go back to that scenario and it's like, first of all, why was that shipped anyway? Why did the senior developer allow it to get pushed into master without it being tested? Okay, so there might have been some internal conversation that was had that okay, we don't actually really need to test this. It's okay, ship it, right? But as long as that conversation isn't put in writing, it falls back on you wrote this code, why did it break? Why did it cause us a big issue in our production environment? Okay? So I hope that was really helpful in terms of how to write good pull requests, and it gave you some insight into how shipping code is done in a corporate environment. So if you liked the video, please feel free to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on future videos. All right, thanks so much. Bye.